everybody, and welcome back to the Simply Human YouTube channel and podcast. Hey, Karen, good to see you.
Hey, Christina. I'm so excited to talk about introversion and extroversion because obviously I am an extrovert and you are an introvert. So I'm really excited to discuss this. What I love about what we do too is kind of not just go through what typically is said, but dive a little deeper. And so I'm very excited about this topic because you already warned me. You're going to learn a lot, Karen, I bet. So looking forward to this topic. So
Yeah, there's a couple of reasons why I wanted to do this episode. As a therapist, this issue comes up so frequently in therapy. The majority of, I would say, my clients are introverts. This society, it's biased towards extroversion. And not only is it biased towards extroversion, it gives really negative messages to introverts that is very harmful to self-concept. So, the first step I have to do is we have to work on getting a better understanding and addressing that wound. And then also when I have couples where one is introverted, one's extroverted, there's a lot of misunderstanding just about how the different people feel connected. And if they don't understand these differences, they are interpreting it as other things that lead to greater conflicts that are just completely wrong. And then in the work environment, again, this comes up because there's so much in work that's team-based and group-based, and it creates natural challenges for introverts that are often overlooked, and there are unhealthy assumptions made. I think that there's not a good understanding about introversion and extroversion and what it is.
I'm excited to share that as an extrovert, I'm learning a lot about how to engage with introverts so that becomes a dialogue between us. So I'm very excited about sharing that we can have a better dialogue and discussion and come together with a better solution by engaging in a way that's different. But it's not, to me, engaging this way was more natural. It wasn't all of a sudden like, I have to do this. It just felt like once I was given this technique, it was easy to do because I'm realizing it's the curiosity I bring to it of the person's opinion, but doing it in a way that it allows them to enter in a way that's comfortable for both of us. So before we get started though, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, share with other people, because like we said, this is a hot topic again, when a new show has hit. And for you podcast listeners, hit the text us link with your comments and questions. So Christina, talk a little bit about so that we're on the same page regarding introversion, extroversion. I think we all think we know, but how would you define it in simple terms?
Okay, yeah. Let me just talk about where I'm coming from in terms of the definition of extroversion and introversion. I am working from the framework developed by Carl Jung, who was a Swiss psychiatrist and contemporary of Freud. And the way that he conceptualized introversion and extroversion was the direction of attention and psychological energy. And this is a graphic for those of you on YouTube that really helps illustrate what this means. So if you're on the podcast, it's an image of, for the extrovert, there's just kind of energy that's outside of the person. It's radiating outward, and it's connecting with other people, with activity, with external stimulation. For introversion, you see a picture of a profile, and all of that activity is internal. It's inside of, these are two profiles of faces. So the activity, the same activity, but it's inside. So with introverts, the focus is on the internal world of thoughts, feelings, ideas. And with extroversion, it's the external world of people, things, and activities. And this culture is, as I said, really biased towards extroversion. So I do want to mention right now that if you are an introvert and are wanting to learn more about your trait, or if you are an extrovert who has an important introvert in your life, or you're a manager, or you have a kid or a spouse who's an introvert, I highly recommend the book Quiet by Susan Cain.
Love that book.
To go in depth about it. She also has a TED Talk, and I'll put the links in the show notes, but we're not going to go fully into that kind of depth in this episode. We're going to be focusing on 3 myths and misconceptions to help people start getting an understanding of these differences of introversion and extroversion.
And a lot of people were introduced this when Carl Jung and the whole big point with the MBTI. So that's when I got the introduction way, 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 way back with introversion, extroversion. And I'm so glad that we're bringing this up because it's not as MBTI isn't talked about as much, but a lot of people have talked about extroversion and introversion. And I think it really has impact, like we said earlier, about the misconceptions and myths, because when you go to learn about MBTI, easy to label. And I think that's part of what we're trying to do is get away from the labels, because the labels really hurt the interactions that you have. And you're making decisions. Oh, he's so different. He's so da da da. And I think it's valuing the differences. So I just want to bring that to everybody is when you do that labeling, it doesn't allow you to really fully experience the gifts of each other that otherwise we could have.
Yeah, and actually, we are going to be doing follow-up episodes on Carl Jung's typology, and that is what the MBTI stands for, Myers-Briggs Type Instrument, and it was a mother-daughter team that took Jung's book when it was translated into English, and I believe this was in the 1920s, and they turned this into an instrument.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, now I am certified in MBTI and I don't ever use that instrument because I use a different psychological instrument that I find to be more consistently accurate in typing. Today, we're just going to really, again, focus on debunking some of the myths around introversion and extroversion.
So let's go in. What's the first myth that you want to talk about?
So I'm going to focus primarily on myths around introversion, because that's where, when you're in a society that has a bias towards extroversion, there's a lot less myths too that you have to bust. And I just think that it is so helpful to debunk some of these myths, because they are myths that even introverts who don't know a lot about introversion and extroversion have adopted and have become part of this self-concept. So one of these myths is that introverts are antisocial or they're shy. So when I get an introvert who's not familiar in my practice and I'm already sensing that they are not understanding their introversion and they have a negative self-concept, I ask them to tell me, like, well, what do you think an introvert is? I swear to God, it's pretty much they're describing the Unabomber or like the Columbine shooters, school shooting profile people. And these are introverts themselves. This is what they're describing. So
that's sad. Exactly.
Yeah, it's really sad. Like, oh, we don't like people and blah, blah, blah.
But that's not true. I think that's the point. It's not that they don't like people. So I'm excited we're talking about this. So
being social is its own thing. There are social introverts and there are antisocial extroverts, and people are like, what? And I guess socialness has nothing to do with what we mean by introversion and extroversion. We can both be social, but how we present that social need is different. And this is a great graphic. Some people may have come across this that I think helps at least explain the introvert side, which is if you think about being social and an introvert social battery, like we love to be social and we're best when it's 2 people, that's the green battery. But when there's 4 people, that's going to drain our battery a little bit more. And when it's, 8 or more, 6 or more people, that social battery drains really quickly.
Whereas for the extrovert, it's the other way, because when I have 2, I'm always nervous because I'm wondering who else we can invite in, because I feel like I like more and more people, right? Because it's like you get engaged more. It's because I crave that energy, because the more people, there's more energy, right? But just even the myth, which is about introverts or antisocial, just to get away from the social, I think that's a great thing for us all to know. It's not about your social or whatever, it's the engagement that's what we're talking about here.
It's the number one thing when I ask someone, and I'm sort of maybe sensing they might be a little on the lean introverted, and I'll ask them, like, do you think you might be introverted? And they say, well, I don't know, I have friends, I'm social.
Yeah,
I
I can
was
see
like,
that because
okay.
you have you know why though? Because automatically, where do I go to introvert? Bookworm. It's seriously when I
Yeah.
was first thinking about it. 'Cause, okay, introvert in their own world, likes to be alone. Exactly what you said. Bookworm. They love books, right? And you know, and it's interesting where you start to worry about the introvert, like, oh, I got to pull them out more. But it's because as an extrovert, I want to help them become more social. And what you just told me, it's
Yes.
not about that. This is why we do this, guys, because there's a little bit of a twist that we want to like take away the mystique, I guess, or have a deeper dive understanding of what we mean by certain words. And so I'm very excited about doing this. So even I'm looking
Well,
forward
let's
to it.
go on to myth number 2, which is extroverts are always outgoing and confident.
Oh, that's not me.
So,
I'm an extrovert. I have imposter syndrome, so I don't have confidence. So
right?
I knew
And
that one.
you may be an extrovert who what you extrovert is more your decisiveness, and maybe you find people tedious actually, and then they just take too long or whatnot. You just like, oh, I need to like, come on, let's get going. Let's make those decisions and then do the next thing, the next thing. They aren't, if they're not non-social extroverts, what they're extroverting doesn't have to do anything with people. It might be around their interests. It might be around an activity. It's not necessarily around being social. And then the assumption is that, oh, if you're extroverted and you're outgoing and you're going to be more confident, because more so it's about a contrast. Introverts are perceived as less confident because the bias are the norms generated around normative extroverted confidence. They're not acknowledging norms around introverted normative confidence, quiet confidence, self-assuredness, comfortable in my own skin, knowing who I am. Those are all introverted, right? Because they require introspection, and confidence comes from that. Whereas an extrovert who is insecure is masking, possibly. They're scanning the environment for how they should be behaving. They're being inauthentic. As long as they're being extroverted, they get a pass on a lot. Now, they will tell you internally they don't feel confident, but the assumption by the presentation and the masking is that they are confident. And the assumption of the introvert is that they are not confident when they may be absolutely comfortable in who they are and just, unfazed by anything going on in the external world. That is confidence. So it is a myth that automatically extroversion equals outgoing and confident.
I also want to say this though too, like for me, that's how I used to be, right, with the extroversion stuff. But then when I started to have the journey of introspection and better understand who I am, right, and through this journey, the extroversion didn't really matter because it was bringing in that curiosity of who I really am. So I feel like now much more confident, but it's not about that extroversion confidence. Is that
Mm-hmm.
is do you know what I'm saying? So I think I wanted to explain that because it's not like just because I'm an extrovert doesn't mean I'll never ever become confident. That's not what we're trying to say. Because I journeyed through this through introspection, which I
Mm-hmm.
needed to go inside my brain, inside myself, noticing things. So it's not like this is why I hate the labeling because I am extremely more confident in my own skin. Right. I have confidence in my decisions than ever before. So I'm not faking to make it like I used to be, right? Because I really am more decisive and more within my own skin and know what my values and boundaries are ever than before. So this is what's
Well,
exciting about.
this leads to the third myth, and I'm going to integrate it with responding to what you just said.
Yeah.
So the third myth is like, I'm an extrovert or I'm an
Or
introvert. And most people know intuitively that that doesn't really fit for them. And they'll say, well, I think I'm an ambivert. And it's, yes, Jung observed we are all both. What we call an introvert or extrovert is about our dominant cognitive function and the primary way that we get energy, but it is balanced out with another cognitive function that is in the opposite direction. Because if anybody was 100% extroverted, that's basically mania. And if somebody was 100% introverted, it's almost like something we call schizoid personality disorder or extreme autism, where there's no engagement with the external world. Okay, that's not most people.
Mm-hmm.
Most of us,
Makes
we
sense.
have a preference. So that's what we call it, a preference. We have a dominant preference that is balanced out and complemented by the opposite. And so, yes, even your really social extrovert is going to have downtime, and they're going to just have downtime. And even someone who is the bookworm is still going to want to go to the movies or go to a museum and have external stimuli that they're using to feed their imagination and their creativity, but they're going to extrovert what they're processing, what they're receiving. They need that to stimulate it. So to integrate it with your question is, we've talked about in people, you can go back to our first 4 episodes on imposter syndrome, where an aspect of that is a dependence on external validation. So when you're only relying on the extroverted sources of you're doing a good job and you are climbing the ladder and here's your degree and all these extroverted artifacts, but you're not doing as much valuing and focusing on the internal work, then that confidence is a bit tenuous. And so, Karen, like what you did is you started doing the inner work to get more of the balance. So you are grounded internally, but also your confidence comes from external experience. The more external experience we get, it's another form of confidence. But if I'm only doing inner work, I'm probably not going to be confident when I have to go do something that requires performance, public speaking, something like that, going to a wedding, because I haven't practiced it very much. I haven't developed the muscle of the extroverted side of my personality. So a real confidence comes from spending some time, if you're a dominant extrovert, doing some inner work. If you're a dominant introvert, exercising that outward focus and being in the world to gain the experience that will build that confidence.
So, Christina, I'm so excited to talk about this in regards to the workplace, because that's where my heart is. And the value of benefiting both introverts and extroverts is just something that we need to do. But because of our culture, sometimes the extroverts, as we know, suck up all the energy of the room and like talk, talk, talk when we engage people in a conversation and all the extroverts are talking. And no one's really facilitating to make sure that we're actually having dialogue. And I think it's important that we need to discuss a little bit between you and I, how can we help people ensure that when they're in the workplace that we're valuing both your extroverts and your introvert colleagues. So
this is an issue of diversity, and it should actually be part of a diversity plan, and it's not. We kind of tend to focus on ethnic diversity or
totally agree.
Gender diversity. We don't do it on this aspect, which is really important. So one is, first, integrate this into it's like your DEI, your diversity, equity, and inclusion should include this. And because it is so significant when you think about the biases towards extroversion, what you just described in a work environment, team activities, group chat, big meetings. I remember back, when the Silicon Valley kind of really took off. And if you look at design of office space, it was like, oh, let's get rid of individual offices because creativity and innovation occurs around the water cooler, and let's create all these shared spaces so that we can have all this dynamic, blah, blah, blah. Okay, guess what? People, can you hear it there? What do you think? That was so biased to the extrovert.
Yeah. And actually, I don't think all extroverts really liked it, to be honest with you. So,
right, because the non-social extroverts,
it was almost way too much for me. Like, really?
Well, and Karen, and this is what we're going to go into in following episodes, is that you are a dominant introverted processor, perceiver. So if it's always distracting, you almost can't hear your own thoughts. You're an extroverted decision maker. We'll go into that later. But yeah, just think about the poor introverts who need to have less external stimulation to be able to hear their own thoughts, how that worked for them. So eventually you saw some modifications where they had these quiet domes like you could crawl inside of, and they had to start adapting because that doesn't necessarily accommodate innovation. Some people need to go have time to percolate.
Totally agree.
So this is what I would do. I would integrate this, say, into my design when we were going to have a group meeting. Is any questions I wanted to have a discussion on, I would set ahead of time to the entire group so that people who are introverted would have that reflection time. And I would tell them they could submit their ideas either through email, or you could do it through Slack, or, you can at least come prepared to be part of the dialogue because you had that reflection time. And it made a huge difference just making that small tweak. And then being aware, you're a facilitator, you're a manager, notice who does seem to be quieter. And you could either just invite them, hey, so-and-so, hey, Sally, do you have any thoughts you'd like to share? Sally may or may not feel comfortable in the big group, but to say, okay, at the end of a meeting, say, now, some of you are going to have some thoughts and some woulda, shoulda, coulda. Oh, I should have said this when I was in the meeting. Send it to me through Slack. Send it to me in an email. So you keep these lines of communication open. That is huge. I worked with a group, right? And we actually did use the Myers-Briggs assessment because I assumed this was part of this huge conflict going on with a lot of employees. And part of it was we put up the different personality types around their processing, not just introversion, extroversion. There's a type that shares my introverted processing that I know struggles with communicating externally and verbally because their gift is seeing a very complex big picture. And when they try to describe it, they hear it and they know they're not conveying it well. And I remember saying to this one guy, does it feel like you don't have enough words? And he's like, not enough words, not enough words. And he felt so understood. But the perception of him was that he wasn't very smart. And he was probably one of the smartest people in the group who not only saw the complexity, but saw consequences 10 years into the future. But he didn't know how to get that out into the group in a way that made sense. And he was so frustrated. And he came back the next day and he was so grateful. And he said, you have helped me so much just understanding this. My sense of who I am, I feel so much better about myself. I talked to my girlfriend about it. It was just life-changing. I mean, this is what we're talking about, the level of wounding, the introversion, helping people understand their gifts and their processing and maybe things they need to do to be able to be more effective. Maybe you have to write it out and have some time to think about it. Maybe you draw it in a schematic, whatever, that will help you convey all the complexity that's on the inside. And in extroversion, this is really important. So during the pandemic, during the beginning of the pandemic where people had to stay in their homes, extroverts felt for the first time this level of distress because their normal battery, their juice was cut off from them. And we hear about studies about how the pandemic was so psychologically damaging and how depression increased and blah, 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 which is, that was the talk. That was what you were hearing in the news. When they actually did a study, that wasn't necessarily what came out. It was for students in school, but for the adults, that wasn't actually panning out in the research. The reason why is because introverts were living our best life.
Exactly.
I
remember you telling me that.
time.
You brought that up to me during the pandemic when we were talking because we were laughing about that. That you were like, I'm living my best life. I'm like,
all my normal clients who are introverts dropped off my client list. And I all of a sudden had these new clients who were extroverts and suffering. And all my introverts felt absolutely guilty. They're like, man, I don't want to tell anybody, but I'm really happy. The stress of turning down invitations. So social introverts, we are social, but our battery drains faster. Our cup for socializing is smaller. And so we turn down more invitations, and there's all this guilt and anxiety that if I say no, I won't be invited again, or there's fear of missing out, or I don't want to hurt people's feelings. So most of the times introverts don't have those boundaries. They say yes, they get overwhelmed, they're dealing with anxiety all the time, they suffer. This was the first time they had no guilt because there were no invitations. They could just be in our natural state for the first time in our lives for probably 100 years since the last pandemic. It was amazing. And yet, this is the thing. If you guys remember, the commercials that came on were these soothing commercials of people celebrating or banging pots out their windows and saying, it will be okay. We will be together soon. All of these reassuring messages for the extroverted world. I got so mad. I was like, where are my reassuring commercials during regular life? Where was my reassurance of don't worry, it'll get quiet soon? You know, it was so biased. I was so mad.
I get that. I get that now. And I want to go back to the workplace for a minute because I want to share you something that I've learned as an extrovert, right? And we talked a little bit how facilitating and how you can do. And yeah, what's very interesting to me is I'm focusing a lot on one of my key offerings is team coaching. And a lot of it is realizing that in the end that you as an extrovert is taking that extra time. Because remember, that introvert likes to talk one-on-one, like we just saying 2 or 3. And even in the room, you engaging them, inviting them in and being very interested in it. So the point of it too is not as an extrovert to talk, and like I almost say like to vomit everything out. The idea is to hold things back and let people engage and ask more questions. That's what I always tell my extroverts. Because if you vomit and share everything, you're not having a dialogue at all. It's all about you. And the idea is to engage people. And we'll put the link in the show notes about the advocacy and inquiry work that we do. And it's really important that you take ownership. Don't let the facilitator do that, or don't let the manager do that. Okay. You as a member of the team, to engage other people like the introverts. I mean, everybody as a member of a team have the responsibility to figure out what's the best course of action that we could take in the future. And that's engaging everybody on the team. And so it's not just about sharing. If you notice, not just the facilitator noticing or the leader noticing, you have to be an advocate for the whole team, which means if your buddy is about to say something who's an extrovert, you may just say, wait, I'd really love to hear from Janet. Do you have a minute? Because especially when she has those questions ahead of time, and sometimes you need to tell the leader, hey, what are the questions that were being asked? Because I think it'd be good for everybody if we all had it in advance. Because even though it'd be benefiting more the introverts than me, the extrovert, you don't have to do the work ahead of time to write it all down, but to let them the ability to think about it the night before or 2 nights. You don't have to give it a week ahead of time because, sometimes there's not enough time. My whole point of it is to give them the time to do it. But I want to make sure that it's not a responsibility of just the leader. I want to make sure everybody understands that you're engaging in dialogue and getting people to come together so that we can share all of the perspectives. Because the best solution comes from when all the perspectives are shared, because we all have gifts to share.
Yeah, you basically want to think about how you run a meeting, how you interact with your team, and come up with new, more inclusive practices. And for you extroverts, be mindful. What I see happen a lot is maybe a more introverted, thoughtful person starts to share something, but the introverted process is slower. It takes more time to go from the inside to the outside. And often what I see is then an extrovert will kind of jump in and cut it off. Yeah, and run
like
with
I just did with Christina. That was on purpose, guys.
Yeah, and after
you should not do is because again, then you think, oh, I get what you're trying, then I'll finish her sentence. It has nothing to do with what she has to say. And that's the whole point of we always talk about. One of the things we always talk about is curiosity. And if you really am curious, I think that's the whole point where you don't interrupt, right? So go ahead, Christina, finish your thought.
Yeah, and Karen just continued to do what she just said extroverts did, and she took over what I was going to say.
Exactly.
And, yeah, so that's a great example. If you do that, stop. Just
And bring
stop doing that.
curiosity back to understanding and fully listening to what they're going to say.
Well, and that means you have to cultivate learning how to be quiet. You have to learn to practice your listening skills. And because let me just tell you, when that happens, if that happens 2, 3 times, that person isn't even going to bother to contribute anymore. And it doesn't matter how much you try to engage. If they've already had that experience, it's like, yeah, you're asking me, but what's the point? I'm never going to get my thought out before John goes and mansplains over me. It has a adverse impact. And with extroversion, there is this impulsivity. This is what's hard. The more that the extrovert is being quiet, you have to understand their battery is draining. It's so they go to get a little juice by getting engaged. And this is a dynamic balance, because what an extrovert needs to get their battery charge is what causes the introverts to discharge. And then what the introvert needs to charge up discharges the extrovert. And let me give you another example of this. Man, it was just wild. I was climbing. When you're rock climbing, you want to be able to focus because you fall if you can't focus. And there was a group of young people, climbers, about 4 or 5 of them, extroverts, man, all jibber jabbering and talking at the same time. Talking at the same time. There was very little listening. 20 minutes on ice cream. I couldn't even. I'm up there on the rock, kind of yelling, "Shut up!" It wasn't really loud enough for them to hear, but it was like more cathartic for me. So I was pretty angry when I came down. I thought it was so disrespectful to just be like, oh, blah, blah, blah. And I was really pissed off. And then they finally ran out of talking about ice cream. And this is where I got the hit of empathy. I saw a look of absolute terror on this one girl's face as it got quiet. And then she started looking nervously around, and she saw a can of soda, like a drink, and she grabbed it and then just started reading the ingredients out loud, like anything to extrovert. I was like, oh my God.
Wow, yeah.
She was suffering.
Yeah,
I really got the hit. Like, she started to experience the suffering of the quiet, of the battery draining, and had very low tolerance for it. And so did something as inane as just anything to make words, anything to extrovert. And I got a new
focus on
understand.
something different.
Not even it had to extrovert. She couldn't just silently
she kind of
read
talk.
it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay.
She had to say it. She
That's
just started
interesting.
reading the
Yeah.
ingredients
Yeah.
out
Yeah.
loud on a. I was like, holy smokes, this girl. And it made me understand, oh man, you suffer with this silence as much as I suffered from you draining my battery, having to listen to all this external stimuli while I'm trying to be internally focused on just, climbing. And it was suffering, that there was a level of suffering. And then I saw it during the pandemic. I saw how many extroverts were really suffering. It was really like, welcome to my world 24/7 when y'all are not in a pandemic. But that it's still a need. It's a need for that connection, that extroversion, that charging up the battery, because really what the draining battery feels like is slow death. So let me just share this to you, social introverts, and those of you who are friends of social introverts. When your social introvert is feeling full, when they take care of themselves, they're going to say, hey, I think I'm going to go. Do not meet it with what's wrong. Because implicit in that is their desire to take care of themselves, and maybe they're full and they need to go recharge a battery. There's something wrong with it. What's wrong? Are you okay? It implies they're not okay. And then my social introverts would say, well, then I start wondering, am I okay? Is something wrong? And then they stay longer, and then they end up absolutely drained, and they need like a 2-day recovery. And then they think, well, there's something wrong with me because I just took 2 days to recover. I'm like, no, you just don't. I said, listen, when you say you need to go home, the reason they say is something wrong is because extroverts, that would be saying, oh, why don't I go into slow death? Because for me to go home and be myself, it's like my battery's going to drain. And because I care about you, my friend, I don't want you to suffer. I'm imagining horrible suffering. So I'm saying what's wrong. So that's why there's confusion, because the extrovert is imagining the suffering of now not being social and not being stimulated stimulated. Oh, that's going to be suffering. Are you okay? Here, no, have another drink. No, stay a little longer. They are actually trying to be kind, loving, and supportive. All you have to say as an introvert is say, hey, I'm actually good. I'm good. Thank you so much for your concern, but I'm good. But I can tell you if I stay longer, I'm going to have a meltdown, and that's not going to be good. And extroverts understand they're going to take care of themselves. They are not going to suffer. They're going to go plug into their battery charger, and they're going to be good. If you could just understand even that little bit, that will help both sides.
So
Introverts will understand that that's care and concern coming from their friends, and the extrovert friend could say, I want to be caring and concerning. Let me do it in a way that's meaningful.
So what is the actual word did you say that you would use if they say I gotta go or I want to go? What should an extrovert say?
You trust the person.
Yeah, and you just say cool.
You
Right?
could
You just say to be.
are you feeling full? Are
Yeah,
you feeling
I
full?
love that. I love that.
Are
So that's
you good?
perfect.
Are
Are you good? I even love that. Are you good?
Instead of
Yeah.
what's wrong, are you
Yeah.
good?
Yeah. Are you good? Is there anything I can help you with? That's good.
Yeah,
Okay, cool.
that
Cool.
is so much better.
Okay. So next time you'll know why I'm asking that because I learned this on the podcast on what to say. I have to do that to Mark tonight. Okay. So Christina, before we go, is there anything else you'd like to finally share?
Yeah, I do want to share real quickly about if you are in a relationship and your partner is an introvert and you're an extrovert, whichever way it goes. You need to understand that there is a large potential for all kinds of misunderstandings that you may not have realized. And let me give you an example of a couple I worked with. They had been ready to split up. In working with them and hearing the issues, it became very clear it was introversion, extroversion differences. So she was the introvert. He was the extrovert. Her perception was he never wants to spend time with me. He's always kind of abandoning me to go be with his friends. His perception was she wants me to just stay home all the time and she doesn't want me to have friends. And when I help them understand about the battery and the needs, we reframed it that your extroverted partner, this is how he charges up his battery. So when she goes with you, understand that it's a gesture of love because that is draining her battery. She's sacrificing energy to support you.
I love
and
that.
when he stays home with you, that is a gesture of love because his battery is going to drain and he's sacrificing energy to be with you. That's a gesture of love. And if you can look at these as gestures of generosity instead of having a threat assessing perspective, you're going to have a whole different experience of it. Whoa, within a couple of weeks, they came back and said, this is 90% of our issue. They changed their frame, and a few months later, they got engaged.
Awesome!
They were about to split up, and they ended up engaged because this was so significant in the relationship.
And I think it's interesting too, because I remember my daughter, whose boyfriend is very extroverted, and he's, does remote work. She'll come home after a long day for her, and he'll still go stay out with his friends for another 2 hours or something, and she's okay with it. Or she won't go to the party because she's too drained. He fully understands, and he just goes. And there's no jealousy in that. That's the maturity of them, and I love that about them because I did not say, "Are you extrovert, introvert? Like you should do this now." But she did that, and I was like, "Wow, that is so cool," because that's exactly what you described. It's kind of respecting that other person and their needs. It doesn't mean it's not an evaluation of your relationship. I love that. I love that story.
Yeah. Here is just another quick example of how this difference shows up in relationships problematically. If you got an introvert and extrovert, the experience of watching a movie or documentary or television together, you will notice oftentimes the extroverted partner wants to talk throughout it and do running commentary. And the introvert is just silently seething because they process internally and they're trying to just absorb into the movie or whatever. But then there's this external distraction going on and on and on. The extrovert is trying to engage with the material, is trying to stay interested in it by this engagement, and they want to share the experience. That means I want to engage with you as well. But that difference just makes it almost impossible to watch. It's usually the introvert who suffers in silence and just tries to communicate their displeasure by just not responding to any effort to engage. So, and usually the extrovert will just keep the running dialogue going after, as long as they're just talking at the TV, they're keeping their energy up. That's a real tough one. And what I would suggest is you're going to have to compromise. You can say, hey, I really want to watch this. This is something you can watch with me and let me watch it in the way I need to. I'd like to watch it with you, but if you can't, that's okay. Like, go do something else. Or the extrovert will be, hey, I really want to watch this documentary with you, but I want to be able to talk about it. Would you be willing to do that with? So that there is an agreement.
Or what you do is, so that's why movie theaters are really good though, right? Because the extrovert knows that the unwritten rule is you don't talk in a movie theater. So, but when I know, but that's what I'm just saying. So I was thinking too about, for me, where,
can I just comment on that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But what extroverts will tell you though, is that they still get some of their needs met, one, because of how big the stimuli is, but they feel the shared energy of everyone in the theater, even though they're not talking. So both can get their needs met.
But that's my mean. So in other words, if you want it, you should go back to the movie theaters, because of that might help you.
Yes.
But I was also thinking about, this is a great commercial for, because I don't have Hulu where I can pay for free ads. So maybe it's good that I have free ads, because that's when I chat.
Oh.
Anyways, let's finish this up with what Christina said. And we just want to just tell you, thank you so much for joining us on this podcast. We look forward to our new series that's coming up that's related to delving further into it. Is these nuances that people usually don't talk about, that I'm so excited that Christina wants to share these with you. And I've learned a lot from these topics and discussions with her. So in our final moments, we'd love to ask you to give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel so that you can actually find out when our new episodes hit. We'd also love to hear comments, especially those people who are podcasts. Please leave us those comments. So until next time, Christina, see ya.
Everybody excited on going on this journey with you. See you later.